Welcome to the Surgical Edge. I'm your host, Stephen Spake, a former Army medic, former scrub tech, now a senior management consultant here at Sullivan Healthcare Consulting. And we're working to help health systems lead in their operating rooms, surgical suites, and all the ancillary departments that touch perioperative services. I've worked everywhere from hospitals to C-suites, and we're focused on what it takes to drive real results. In this show, we're going to have a conversation with one of our other senior consultants, Shawn Craddock, who also has a military background. We're going to focus on how he moved from the military environment into healthcare consulting with Sullivan, his educational background, his experiences, and then have some conversations related to how that leadership transitions from the military into the world of professional consulting. With that, I'd like to welcome Shawn Craddock. Thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. This is awesome. Yeah, I'm glad to be here with you. So just a little bit about me. That was a great introduction, but just a little more granularity to that. So I had a nursing degree. I got a full ride out of high school to become a nurse for the Army and ended up in air defense artillery. Not exactly sure how that happened.
As the Army does.
Yeah, so I got to shoot Patriot missiles for a short amount of time, which was great fun. I learned a lot about leadership and, who I was and all of the buzzwords you can throw in there. But, really thought that I needed to use my career path that was laid out for me in college. And so a bunch of letters later and a senior congressman who sat on the Armed Service Committee, and I was back in the nurse corps. And so was in the nurse corps there, started out as a 66 hotel, which for those of you that don't speak military, that's a general floor nurse. So I worked on a 52-bed med-surg pediatric telemetry floor that the average patient census was about 47. Very busy. So did that for 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days. Not that I kept track of that. Knew I wanted to be in the OR. And a spot came open in the OR, which I jumped on, the training course there for the Army, and then haven't looked back, been in the OR ever since. Got out of the Army in 2004 after finishing my stint in the lovely and luxurious Baghdad, Iraq. Joined a civilian organization in Northern Virginia as a clinical specialist. So went into leadership right out of the military in the civilian healthcare side. Got my first director position at the ripe old age of 33, I think I was, maybe 34. And so I was the youngest director in that system at the time. Really learned a lot there and then advanced my career, made it all the way to administrative director, which is basically a vice president role without the extra title. And decided that I needed something different. I was looking to make meaningful change. I just felt like I was kind of stagnant in that. And joined Sullivan Healthcare Consulting. And so with all of that said, I found Sullivan because I had been a client a couple of times at other hospitals that I'd been at. When we needed some surgical help, we had called them in and was just blown away by the service they provided, the great results, and have been talking to Randy Heiser, our president, for a while, and knew that I wanted to work with him and for Sullivan. And once my daughter graduated high school, I gave him a call and said, I'm ready. It just so happened that he had posted a position earlier that week, and the rest, as they say, is history.
And then just for everyone else's information, my background, also military. I spent a decade in the Army as a combat medic. Most of my time was on Fort Bragg in North Carolina. So Shawn and I have a very interesting crossover in terms of our history, what we've done, how we've served, places we've deployed to. Generationally, a little bit offset. He's got a couple years on me. Just a couple.
Decades.
No, decade. I was 2012 to 2022. And then similar to myself, as Shawn exited the military, he also delved a little further into academia. My first master's is in epidemiology. My second master's is in business administration. Shawn, what's your educational background?
I started with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing. Got that in 1998. And then in 2007, 1998, laugh it up.
I will.
And then after I exited the military, I was a little bored because, I wasn't drilling and doing all those things all the time. And so Went back for my master's degree, which I finished in 2007, and that was a general master's in science for nursing with a concentration in leadership. After that, I waited a little while longer. I waited until 2014. I waited until 2014 to pursue my doctoral degree. And really, to be honest with you, I was conned into it by some instructors that I knew at James Madison University, where I live. And they kept saying, "You should just do this, Shawn. You should just do it. It's going to open up doors for you." And, uh, I was like, well, why not? And so started that program, had a heart attack in the middle of it. They do call it a terminal degree, so it's either you're at the end or it's going to kill you. Got through that. I'm still alive, and finished up my doctoral degree in I guess it was 18, because I took the extended path. And so finished that up in 2018. And, they were right. It did open up some doors for me, got me into that higher level of leadership. But also along the way, I've done many other training courses, from pediatrics to, of course, the OR, the operating room program, to Lean Six Sigma training, holding 2 specialty certifications, one as a CNOR, certified operating room nurse, and one is an NEBC, which is a board certified nurse executive. And so I hold those 2 certifications, as well as a couple years ago, I got bored again and did some work through Cornell University and got 2 post-grad certificates, one in executive healthcare leadership and the other in healthcare change management.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but I think part of it is why we get along so well with that education as a result of boredom. Because I actually just
Mhm.
started looking towards doctoral programs to apply to in August, and my wife,
Yeah.
bless her, has lived with me through both of my master's degrees, one of which
Mhm.
I did while I was in the Army. And there was apparently a running bet over how long I would last after finishing my MBA before I started something else.
Mhm.
And I lost her money in the family group chat, so I had to apologize
Yeah.
for that. But yeah, I'm right there. I'm staring down probably a DRPH, a doctorate of public health, with a concentration in implementation science, because that fits pretty well with what I do with Sullivan. And on that note, what is it that you do? In talking with Randy and talking with Jerry, we seem to have a lot of people that are very cross-functional, but all of us have, an area of extreme interest or expertise. Randy, in addition to being the company president and a brilliant man altogether, he's very, very good with anesthesia. Jerry
Mhm.
is incredibly cerebral when it comes to clinical science because he has that background. I am starting to really build a specialty in rural care, critical access facilities. Pretty much any client in the middle of East Jesus nowhere has my attention,
Mhm.
because it's where I grew up, and I think it's an underserved community, and I
Right.
really am fascinated by it. So, what would you consider to be your specialty?
So, I do 2 things that I consider to be my specialty, and both of them stem from, my lifelong passion in the field of nursing, and the other stems from my doctoral work, which was based on my passion. And really, that is recruitment and retention of nursing staff and leadership development. And so, I consider that my 2 specialties. In fact, where I'm located now, one of the 2 out of the 3 primary functions that they brought me here for was to develop the leadership team and put a cease to the retention woes. And so, I consider that the 2 things I do especially well. I've got a whole host of tools and things that I use, some of those from my doctoral work, some that I've developed, just working with clients in the past. And so I think I have a pretty strong repertoire of tools and you know, abilities to be able to help organizations specifically around those 2 things, recruitment and retention and leadership development, and really bringing in best practices, not only from my own research and study, but from previous clients, from other things that I've done, and even bringing things in from other industries.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest advantages is coming out of the Army. You get to pick up on so many of those intangibles that can't be
Mhm.
taught in a classroom, or are difficult to teach on the fly.
Yep.
And we come at this from a similar background, but also a very different background. You were a commissioned officer, and I was a
Mhm.
non-commissioned officer. So we both got to experience different sets of those intangibles, or maybe a different MO to apply them. And while we're on that, what are some of the things that you can directly translate from your previous military service into how you coach and teach and mentor and manage leaders in organizations that look to you to have that experience and put that faith in you to train their folks?
Yeah, that's a really good question, man. I've actually given that quite a bit of thought since you and I last talked, just because I thought to myself, what in the world is the answer there? And I've come up with a few things. And number one is just communication tactics. The ability to communicate with any level of an organization effectively is a key to what we do as consultants, and you really gain that from the military because, like you said, you were a non-commissioned officer. I was a commissioned officer. We had to be able to communicate with each other, and as a commissioned officer, when I was 30 whatever years old, as a captain, I had to also communicate with the 18-year-old privates. And so, conversely to that, you also had to communicate with your full bird colonel, that was probably when I was in anyway, probably in his 50s or in her 50s. And so, just learning different communication styles for different groups of people and then understanding how to translate that to the audience. So, I would not communicate the same with my first sergeant as I did the privates on the front line. And so I think that's a really useful skill is just that communication tactics, knowing how and when to communicate with whom and how. So that's number one. The other one is just leadership principles. I've noticed in my civilian career, especially in healthcare, most of the leaders weren't taught to be leaders. It was, as I called it back when I first became a civilian nurse, it was leadership by default. And so, the director would come out and say, okay, who wants to be the nurse manager? And whoever didn't take a step back was the nurse manager. Um, or they would find the best clinician and make them the nurse manager, which, is also detrimental at times because you've lost your best clinician. And a lot of times your best clinician isn't really interested in being a leader. And so I think just being able to translate leadership abilities and leadership styles from the military into the civilian world is huge because we were taught to be leaders. We were groomed and grown from day one to advance. And so we walk into a scenario, and now even as a consultant, I walk into a scenario a lot of times where, the leaders, some of them have been leaders for a while, but others, they're brand new. A previous client of mine, I walked in and out of 6 leaders, one of them had been a leader for more than a year. And so it's really being able to mentor and coach them and really teach them most of those intangibles that we talk about, communication and situational awareness, which is also something that we're big on in the military, being able to read a room, being able to understand, what's going on around you, being observant. All of those things are keys in what we do, not only in healthcare, but as leaders and also as consultants. And so the ability to walk into an organization and analyze what's happening through observation and conversation, and then being able to translate that into recommendations is something that we learned as leaders in the military.
Yeah, I fully agree. And it's such an incredible show of faith that I've got from my current client, my larger implementation client, that when working with their peri-op director, her leadership team underneath her, like her ADMs, are all very new in their positions
Mhm.
and don't have that leadership background. They're phenomenal nurses, phenomenal clinicians, great at what they do, but they're learning to lead. And
Right.
in speaking with that, my counterpart on the client side, she has asked and told me, like, if you find an opportunity to employ this management team in Periop for a task, like, do it. Feel free
Yeah.
to take them in and mentor them and develop them.
Mhm.
And it's such a fascinating dynamic. One of my first projects with Sullivan, I stayed with the charge nurse, shoulder to shoulder for a week, and talking her through the process of driving her schedule and not letting the
Mhm.
schedule run itself, but how
Right.
impactful that charge nurse position has to be in order for it to function successfully. And I was talking with a friend of mine who's also in nursing, and she had asked what I did that day. And I just mentioned, I was with a charge nurse in an OR teaching them how to be a charge nurse. And she mentioned casually, she's like, are you qualified for that? Like, you're not a nurse. You're not a
Mhm.
charge nurse. And I
Right.
was like, right, but I've been in charge and
Right.
I don't need to teach her how to be a nurse. She's got the nurse part down pat. Phenomenal
Mhm.
nurse. Brilliant. She doesn't need me to teach her anything related to that. She needs me to show her how to command her day, how to command
Right.
everyone else's day in that surgical suite, because that charge nurse needs to run that schedule. She needs to, or
Mhm.
they need to run that board. And it's so often that most of that is just intangibles and tone. I think the one thing that I told her, and I had someone tell me this once, and I can't for the life of me remember who, but they said don't lead with the question mark. If you're leading,
Right.
use a directive and put a period on it. And if it doesn't get
Mhm.
heard with the period, put an exclamation point on it. Because as soon as you end that directive with a question mark, you no longer have the capacity to enforce that because it becomes a question.
Right.
And you need to command. You need to be in charge. I had a major tell me once, when in charge, be in charge. This man was
Right.
That's probably the only thing that he ever said to me that I was like, I like this. I'm going to keep it forever. The rest of it, I kind of just passed on. But when in charge, be in charge is something that I will always live by. And it's funny that, a major in the United States Army told me that. And about 2 weeks ago, Randy told me the same thing. And I think that's in part why Sullivan is such a comfortable organization for me,
Mhm.
because almost half of our staff is veterans.
Right.
And I didn't realize that going in. And you know, it just worked out really well, and it's not intentional, but it's just interesting. And I think a lot of that, I'll sing Randy's kudos a little bit more, and then I swear I'll stop. He fosters an environment that's very productive for past service members or prior service members to come
Yeah.
in and be successful because of how he leads. At least
Right.
it's good for
Yep.
me. It seems to work for you, Mark, Jerry. We got a lot of vets in the crew.
Yeah, I think just to sing Randy's kudos just for 1 second, hopefully he doesn't listen to this because, I can't say these things to his face.
Yeah, never, never.
But, one thing he's always said, and it's been very impactful for me because not only has he told me, but I've heard him tell other people as they come into the organization. He's like, "Don't be afraid to make a mistake." He said to me, "I expect you to make a mistake. That's okay if you learn from it. Don't do the same thing twice, but it's okay to make a mistake." And when you foster a culture and an environment where you can take some risks because it's okay to make a mistake, then I think you get more out of the team members. And I really think it creates the environment like we're talking about. It's really good for people like us, people like veterans, to come in and know that that's okay. Because we're gonna take some chances. We're gonna do some things that, maybe haven't been done before, and we're gonna see if they work, and we're gonna experiment, and, that's how we make things better. That's how we find new processes and new ways of doing things. And, I know you, for example, I mean, I'm just gonna say this one time, and that's the only time I'll ever say this to you,
Oh
Stephen,
God.
but even you, I mean, you came in and you started challenging the way we do things. And we have to do that, whether it's a GPT or whether it's a podcast or, whatever it is, you're challenging the way we're doing things. And I think that's great, especially, for us older folks in the group, even though I'm one of the youngsters, comparatively
You're
speaking.
the next oldest person, and
Yeah, right.
there's still 20 years between us.
Yeah, I'm the next youngest one in the group, but I think it's good to constantly challenge and try to break the norms because that's exactly what we're doing inside of organizations. When we go into organizations, we look at their norms and then we give them ideas of how to make things better. And so we're constantly challenging and breaking those norms. And so I think it's really important for all of us to understand.
Absolutely, and that was a well-drawn parallel. So good job on that one. You better tone that down, or I'm going to get replaced on this podcast gig.
Yeah, no, 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 no. I'd I'll go back to the OR tomorrow. It's okay.
That's fair. That's fair. Going back to organizational leadership, and as far as the veteran aspect is concerned, if you were speaking to a manager or a director, what are some advantages you would make them aware of when it comes to pursuing hiring veterans? Because post-service employment is a challenge faced by America's service members,
Right.
and it leads to many secondary and tertiary effects. But if you were to speak to a hiring manager, what are some things that you would consider advantages of employing veterans beyond, the obvious tax breaks?
Right, right. Honestly, when you get a veteran, and I'm not saying all of us are great like that.
Great call
I'm
out.
not
Great
saying
call out.
you know what I but in general, you're getting somebody who's been through the fire. They've been through hardships and they know what sacrifice is and they know how to work hard and they know how to work as a team. I mean, those are core values in the army, working at or in any military branch. I say army because you and I were army, so it's easy. But
Yeah.
any military branch, you've got to work as a team. Otherwise, you all fail. And so, I think when I talk about leadership, a lot of times people hear me say leadership and they think, formal titles, managers, directors, lieutenant colonel, whatever, but I'm not. I'm talking about the leadership skills inside of every one of us. And so when you hire a veteran, you're getting those leadership skills that have been honed and forged in fire. And so what that equals is we don't get scared. We're not scared of the challenge. And, unfortunately, a lot of places I go, I encounter not only staff, but other leaders that they're afraid of the challenge. They don't want to put themselves out there. They don't want to be yelled at by a surgeon or, whatever that is. In fact, I mean, I was told that here recently. Well, but if I do that, I'm going to get yelled at. You might, but you might also win this person over because you're charging ahead. And so I really think, with the veteran that I'm thinking of, you're going to get somebody that's self-starting, motivated, hard charging. They're going to have those grown leadership skills and they're not going to be afraid of the challenge. And healthcare right now, let's be honest, healthcare right now is a big challenge for every leader and for every consultant and for every staff member that's out there. Healthcare is a massive challenge right now. And, there's still some uncertainty about where we're going and how we're going to get there and all those things. And so being able to make organizations more effective and more efficient is the current challenge that folks like us are trying to solve. But we have to have leadership in all areas that are not afraid of that. And they're going to attack that. And really leading through change is going to be the one skill set that I think every healthcare organization is going to be looking for the next 20 years.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal point. And then just to clarify a little bit, when we're talking about, or when Shawn's mentioning service members that go through the fire, we're not being deployment specific. I think that is a soapbox I will die on.
Mm-hmm.
From this perspective, having a combat deployment does not quantify your military service in terms of what you've been through. Is it significant?
Absolutely.
Yes. But as we're in this phase of what the military looks like, it's not as common. I am incredibly fortunate to have gotten as many deployments as I did. But even though I have those, I will never look down on anyone else's service that did not include a deployment.
Right.
And in total transparency, some of the most stressful, frustrating, irritating, miserable, cold, hot, wet, warm, humid experiences I've ever had were not in a deployment. Most of them were in Fort Polk, Louisiana, if I'm being honest.
They're right here in the good old US of A.
Oh my God. Between, I'll tell you that some of the two most miserable military experiences I have were Fort Polk, Louisiana for JRTC, and then Fort Pickett, Virginia.
No.
It is the coldest I had ever been. We came we came from Iraq to Fort Pickett, Virginia in February for I think it was like a gunnery or something. I don't even know why I was there because I was light infantry at that point. So because we didn't have a mission, our commander was just like, well, you're infantry, go walk around for 30 days. So that was our mission. We just walked around in a circle for 30 days in Fort Pickett, Virginia in February in the rain. I was not happy. So the stuff that you go through in the military, even without deployments, is a true test of intestinal fortitude and character. And that is where that development comes from.
Look, speaking of Fort Pickett, Fort AP Hill is very similar. Now, I was never at either one of those active duty, but of course I was in ROTC in high school, so I did training every summer. And Fort Pickett and Fort AP Hill were the two favorites because I lived in Virginia. And there's an actual swamp in there on the land nav course. And so if you've never been up to your basically your armpits in swamp water looking for a 3 foot high metal pole, you haven't lived.
I mean, I've done the Star Course looking for a 3 foot metal pole in 4 feet of water, so
Yeah.
I feel your pain on land nav. Anyone that's done the Star Course, also, we're right there. So that'll a very small fraction of the population listening to this will get that reference, but if they
Right,
do,
that's right.
they do. Um, yeah, so I just wanted to hop up on that soapbox real quick that
Yeah.
deployments do not quantify or
No.
qualify your military service.
No, absolutely not. And we spend a lot of time, especially when you're wearing the uniform. And what I mean by that is when you're still in, we spend a lot of time picking on each other for deployments and those who haven't been deployed. But you're absolutely right. That does not define your military service. It's only a small piece of it. Again, you said significant,
Yeah,
but it's only a piece of your military service and the
yeah.
training and the things that you've been through. And the other thing we haven't even touched on is the camaraderie. But we could spend a whole hour talking about that.
That that's a hard topic given that we're a completely remote company.
That's right. That's right.
And since we're talking about the transition military to civilian, that's probably been the single hardest or single most challenging aspect of it for me, is that I went from being on a 12-man team and with my guys, and I say guys because they were all men,
Right.
but also I worked with loads of incredibly capable service members of whatever gender. But you spend your whole day, week, month, years with them, and then you transition to civilian world, and it's very isolating.
Mhm.
So it's definitely something to think about and work through. And I go stir crazy when I'm here in my office solo, and it's just I'll go a day without talking to another human being sometimes. And then my poor wife, I'll wrap up what I'm doing with work and then go upstairs and just jabber a mile a minute, and she's just like, "Oh man, you haven't talked to anyone today, have you?" So it's like,
She's
"No,
like,
I'm
you need to
sorry."
call more people.
Yeah, she'll just be like, "Go outside, touch grass, man. Like, take a chill
Yeah.
pill and then come back." It's like it's a good call.
Yeah. I don't experience that nearly as much as you because I'm typically at a client.
Yeah,
And so, each day I'm in there with other people, but there were a couple weeks, here and there and in between clients where I'm sitting at home and I'm, working from my home office and I'm a massive introvert, Stephen. I'm
yeah.
on the MBTI, I'm 89% introvert. But that only means that I recharge by myself. It's like the loss of human contact. Like my wife went to see her mom one week and I was off. Well, I was in between clients. I wasn't off, but I was working from home and it's like the cat and I became best friends. Like I would hold complete conversations with the cat. And my wife would get home and she's like, "So, how was your time?" And I'm like, "Well, you know what Rosewell said to me?" And she's like, "What?"
That's funny. As we're looking at wrapping this up here,
Yeah.
why do you think the military to consulting path is such a common trend? I've seen it a lot. Shout out to my buddies at Sit Reps to Steerco's, a great Instagram account that really focuses on getting veterans into high level MBA programs, such as myself. Most of their population that transitions to the MBA world are commissioned officers because they have the bachelor's, they go right into the MBA. I'm kind of
Mhm.
the oddity as an NCO, and I continue to remind them of that. What are some things that you find to be common successes as far as ties between veterans and the consulting community?
Yeah, Stephen, I think we've talked about a few of them already, and that's, leadership skills, assessment skills, situational awareness. I think all of those things lend very well to consulting, because not only do we go into an organization sometimes half blind, we have a report sometimes that tells us what's going on, but you don't have all the level of detail after an assessment, or you walk in with, to do an assessment and you're trying to figure out, okay, where can we help them and where do they need to be helped? And I think those are the keys. And I think military service, again, you learn those skills and you grow them and you work on them, like you said, every day, every week, every month, every year. You continuously work on them to hone them in and to really make them sharp. And I think that's what consultants do. And those are necessary skill sets. So I think the transition from military to consulting is, for me, it was a no brainer, I guess I could say, because it's like, okay, that's exactly what my but I think my skill sets are. That's what I've been taught to do. Now let me go do it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, for me, I think we're so comfortable being generally the veteran community working
Mhm.
and operating in a scenario that's only somewhere between 40 and 60% functional,
Right.
that I'm fine being dropped in and being told figure out the other 60 to 40% and get it on track. And one of the fundamental principles of a very famous leader in the army was that you needed to have tolerance for ambiguity in order to be
Mhm.
successful. And I think understanding that you do have to have that tolerance for ambiguity and at a certain level acceptance of risk. Not necessarily, I talked about this with Jerry, but not necessarily risk for the patient's safety and security and well-being, but
Mhm.
but a tolerance for risk to go, hey, try this out. Let's see if this works. You got to break some eggs to make an omelet, and I
Right.
think that's something that we're all pretty comfortable with.
Yes, absolutely.
And in keeping with the theme of this podcast, you're going to be our first guest that gets to answer the
Oh
magic
boy.
recurring segment question.
No.
What is the sharpest insight that you've picked up in your career? Something that has really helped you drive success and make decisions?
So this is gonna sound a little hokey. Um, and I did go to Virginia Tech, so
I
that
was I was gonna say you went to like easily the top 5 or 6 technical institutions in the United States.
um,
A ways behind Georgia Tech though, so go Jackets.
yeah, no, not even close. Not even close, brother. We'll talk about that another day. So the number one insight I have, and it's around leadership, and that is always strive to be better than the best leader you've ever had. I think if you follow that little piece of what I call wisdom, I think you will always succeed. Because when you think about the best and worst leaders that you've ever had, you actually learn more typically from the worst leaders you've had than you do the best, because you learn what not to do and what you don't want to be. But when I'm thinking about something complex, or, if I'm trying to solve a personnel problem, or, something like that, that's a little more cerebral plus touchy feely when you have both of them together. I always think about a couple of leaders in my life and I say, how would they have approached this, and what would have been their goal of this, especially like hard conversations. What would have been their goal? And then I try to be better than that. Now, do I succeed in that? Very rarely. But I think if you strive for that, you're gonna hit pretty close and you're gonna be happy with the end result. And I tell all of my leaders those type of things. I picked up Randy's philosophy. It's okay to make a mistake, but think about the best leader you've ever had and what would their approach have been. Now do it better than that.
This would be a good time. You want to give a shout out to a couple leaders that have been influential
Oh,
for you?
man. Okay. Yeah. Let me think about that for a minute. So Lieutenant Colonel John Austin, who is probably not listening to this, and honestly, I haven't talked to him since 2004, but he was my first OR director in the Army. He deployed to Balad when I went to Baghdad. He was a phenomenal leader, clear communicator, and was not afraid to jump in there and do the work he's asking you to do. And so he is probably one of my top leaders that I've had. Again, that's from my military time. And then thinking about on the civilian side, I mean, there's a couple. I mean, I had a mentor. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us. Her name was Patricia Seaford. A lot of people in the nursing world, especially the OR, will know that name. So if you're listening and you're an OR nurse, you probably know her. She actually wrote the textbook on care of the cardiac patient in OR. I can't remember the exact title of the book, but she actually wrote the textbook. Just a massive mentor of mine. And although, she wasn't typically in a formal leadership position, she was everything that embodied a great leader. And, if I can just tell a short story about her,
Please.
she was the type of person, and this is why she was my mentor. I mean, I was hot shot out of the Army. Was, God, what was I? 30 years old, maybe 29. I don't even remember now. But, let's say I was 29 years old. I knew everything there was to know about everything. Trish worked for the Inova Health System in Northern Virginia, and I worked for them as well for a while. And as a clinical specialist, I was part of the ILN, the Inova Learning Network. And we were in this meeting and we were trying to solve, how do we train our nurses, better, faster. And this was right when Periop 101 was kind of becoming a thing. And so we're all talking, and man, I had this great idea. And to this day, I don't remember what the idea was, but I had this brilliant idea. I was going to save nursing education. Like I was going to be like the king of all nursing education. Such a good idea. And I said the idea, and I sat back and I waited for the round of applause and, the heralds of the coming of the new king. And Trish looked across the table from me and she said, "Shawn," she goes, "you're one of the smartest young people I know. But that is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard you say." I mean, I loved her. And she was just that honest, but she did it in such a way where you just felt okay with it. You were good. And so she embodied everything a good leader is, especially with communication, being straightforward to the point. I mean, I absolutely love the woman to death. Unfortunately, like I said, she's no longer with us, but man, she was this little wiry gray hair, had this big bundle of hair going on, and just in her 60s worked circles around anyone in their 20s and 30s. I mean, she was just that person. I absolutely adored her. So there was her, and then I've had other couple really good leaders in my time. Hopefully she listens to this because she's on my LinkedIn account, and I'm sure I'm going to be putting something out there for folks to listen. But Crystal Farmer, my last permanent position where I was an admin director, absolutely loved working for her. Again, just the embodiment of a leader. She cared about you. She tried to make you better. And sometimes that was tough. Sometimes it was tough love. you know, she was one of these people that, taking care of somebody meant the good and the bad. And you did them both. And, she did them with the same, enthusiasm to try to make you better. And so she'll stick with me. In fact, every now and again when I'm at home, I'll call her or text her. We've had lunch a couple times, things like that. But those leaders stick with you, and they should stick with you, and you should carry them with you. And every time I'm at a new client, I think to myself, I want them to remember me as someone who came in, who cared, even though I'm only here a short amount of time typically, but came in, cared, helped us, and left the place better than when he got here. And really that's I think that's some of the highest compliments that you can get, is if people think of you that way.
Yeah, I agree. I'll take this moment to give a shout out to some of the people that have influenced me along the way. Army side, now Major Hunter Fifield, and a retired first sergeant or master sergeant, I'm not sure which he retired as, Gilberto Roman. They were my leadership team at my first duty station, or my first unit. Just phenomenal examples of what a PL and platoon sergeant should work like together. It was funny because they obviously both had the same platoon, but very different approaches to managing that platoon. And it really taught me to understand, they really taught me to understand and appreciate administrative leadership, as well as that boots on the ground development of your subordinates. They both had me from PFC, private first class, through specialist, through corporal, through sergeant, and then sergeant promotable. So they had me for a while, and they were just phenomenal. We still get together about every 2 years at this point. That whole platoon it was just a phenomenal experience. But those two specifically, in terms of leadership development for me as a young man, it was incredibly important. I'll shout out Sergeant Major Walter E. Kirk. The man was a lunatic, but God, I would run through a wall for him. He was probably my favorite sergeant major I've ever had.
Yeah.
Just like you said, I think he was pushing 50, if not on the other side of it, and would run circles around anybody and just knew stuff, got excited, got involved. And it was really cool for me to see someone just genuinely be doing something for that long, because he was like 30 years in at that point, I think, or was by the time he ETS or retired. but it was so refreshing to see someone get that excited about what they do and love being what they are. It was just
Yeah.
really cool. And then civilian side for me, I think, we've talked about Randy a lot. I think he's a great example. Jerry with Sullivan is a great example. But big shout out to Christina Appen and Robin Smith from Jackson Healthcare.
Yeah.
They were really influential on helping me mold my leadership style from military into a corporate compatible, more civilian-esque
Hmm.
way to drive results. So they were both incredibly important in that. And I will appreciate them forever, and I'm still in touch with them. So phenomenal crew.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought Randy into that. I know we talked about him earlier, but yeah, I'm not going to give him any more kudos, but
No.
there is a clear path that he has set us on, and he does it through really, really great guidance. It's and again, I talked about it's okay to make a mistake, learn from them. And I think that's really important for all of us. And so, when Randy retires, or they boot me out of this organization or something, we'll talk about, Randy will be on my list of top 3. But I think it's a little early to tell. He may get rid of me tomorrow. You never know.
Yeah, it might be 4 then. On the topic of Randy's guidance, I think sometimes the best guidance he gives me is, I don't have guidance for that. Figure it out. Come up with a
Yeah.
solution. And it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like, all right, cool. That gives me a lot of white space.
Right. Yeah. We don't have an answer to this yet, so go find one for us.
Yeah.
Then we'll
And
all
it's
use it.
exactly. And I think that's one of my favorite things about him, manage and how he leads Sullivan's. All
Yeah.
right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. I appreciate you coming on to this with me. Thanks for taking a chance and giving me your time. And I'm excited to see where this goes. I appreciate your insight, and I'm looking forward to being on another project with you, but not in the last place we were on a project together.
All right. Yeah, we won't mention that.
No. All right, dude. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. Have a great evening, man.